Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning in today. We are a year-round digital talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're joined by the wonderful Anson Boon, who's currently starring in the film Blackbird. And I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about the fact that this film, it's based on a 2014 Danish film, and whether it's actually a useful or valuable tool to look to the source material in an instance like this, or whether you actually find it more conducive to just really focus on the script and the material that you're working on.
Well, I'll let you in on a secret.
Yeah.
I did watch the film before I was offered the role because I mean, there's obviously the cast is made up of some incredible actors, like Susan Sarandon and Kate Winslet, and those guys don't have to audition quite like me. So they were also given the script from the get-go. I wasn't given the script as soon as I was asked to audition. So I knew I wanted to be part of this film. I read the log line and I thought it was really interesting. So I had nothing to go off, so I took it upon myself to watch the original Danish film. And then we went to our rehearsal week after I was offered the role, and we were sat around a table and the director said, now, obviously none of you have watched the original film, so we'll just dive right into the script. And I went bright red and everyone was like, oh no. And I was like, yeah, no, I haven't watched it. But I had watched it, so I'll admit that. But I don't think under normal circumstances it is that helpful, and I probably wouldn't do it again. In our case, our film actually turned out very different to the original, the Danish film. It's very different in every way. But in many cases, it's not, because you sort of have that preconceived notion of what the film should look like or how your character should be played. So it's something that I steer away from in the future, unless I'm not given the script again, and then I'll do it just so I have a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the audition process because you went through, I think, a couple of rounds of auditioning. And what I was really interested in terms of that is kind of how you approach that second audition, because you've already been in the room, you've already read the part, you know that they really like something about what you're doing. So I wanted to ask about kind of how much do you keep the same and how much do you feel a need to evolve that performance when you're walking back into the room for the same part again?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never thought about it too much before, but I guess subconsciously you're given a little bit more confidence because you know you must have done something right. And often you get given notes from your first audition, and they like what they saw, but it needs to be done a bit more like this, for example. I remember that wasn't the case on Blackbird. I actually did the first tape with this background from home, as you can see right now, read it with my mum. And like I said, I hadn't been given the script, so I read a couple of scenes. And then a couple of weeks later, I heard that the director really liked it, but he was on holiday. So could I go in and meet with the casting director and go do an extra scene? And then I was given the script, so I had a read of what was going on. And I went in, and I think Blackbird was unique because it's very much an ensemble piece, and although it's character driven, it's a lot about relationships and how all of these people fit into a family together. And the real character is the family and the journey that they go through together. So I think it was important for the director and the producers to know what I was like as a person, and also sort of from not logistical, that's the wrong word, but not from a creative point of view. I would be working as the only unknown actor on a set with a bunch of Oscar winners. So it's like really, and it sounds amazing even when I say it now, sort of really unique and extraordinary. So I remember I read the scenes with the casting director when I went in for the recall, and then she asked if we could just tape a chat that she could show the director. And I remember she was asking me about if I'd worked with any like cool people before, and I had worked on things with cool people, but not directly. And I remember completely lying to her face and telling her that I'd been in this like massive scene with Luke Evans in this TV series I'd done called The Alienist, which was a load of rubbish because I was pretty much in the background of said scene and didn't say anything to him. So, but it worked out in the end. Sometimes you have to tell little white lies to get on. But I sort of felt like they were seeing what I would be like working with, a bunch of really big names in a very sort of condensed atmosphere. And yes, you do kind of go on a journey when you go from the first audition to the second audition, I think. You have that little bit of extra time, and you've already done the first audition. You could kind of treat that as the warm up. So you've had a taster of what it feels like to get into that person's shoes. And then for the second audition, they trust you. You can perhaps play about with it a little bit more. And often then that's your first chance to read with the director, who can talk you through exactly what he wants or she wants. So yeah.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about your character in this is it's not just about the details for when he's on screen. There's actually several moments where other characters are giving tiny snippets of information about him, even down to like the grades that he gets in school. So kind of as you were going through the script, what did that process look like? Not just in terms of looking at what are my lines and my moments in the scene, but where are the moments that other people are almost giving details, either directly about my character or that kind of lead into the relationship that he has with them.
Yeah, well, we did this rehearsal week in London before we started shooting, where the eight of us just sat around a table, the eight actors and then the director, and we sat around and read through the script line by line, broke it down, and as we went along, we found ourselves telling each other stories about our own lives and relating it to our families, and then dropping in little quirks that we have, and then it was a very, like I said, it was an ensemble and a big collaboration, and we would all chuck in funny ideas we have, or I'd make a joke about how uptight Kate Winslet's character is of my mum, and then we'd find a thing of like, she'd be like, "Oh, you think I'm uptight?" like that, and then we'd find these little quirks of like, so then it became a thing that I'm nagging at my mum and dad all the time because they're telling me what to do, and then the audience will see when they watch the film, there's a bit where my character gets a bit creative and comes up with this sort of rap poem thing. And I remember when we were rehearsing that around this table, and naturally Rainn Wilson, who is a father and who plays my father, just started tapping his feet and nodding his head like that. And then of course we found some dad dancing that he could do. So we, in this very sort of natural way, we found these little quirks that we all had in these little bits in each other's individual relationships that we had. And we spent a lot of time in the rehearsal week also just we'd go in pairs and discuss and work through our individual relationships with each other on screen. So we kind of had these little bits before we started filming, and then when we did start filming, the director Roger had this approach to it where we would go through and shoot a scripted take. So we would perform exactly what's written in the script, line-wise and direction-wise. And then we'd do a take once he'd got that, where we knew what we had to reach at the end of the scene. So if at the end of the scene, we've had to teach the audience this, and this person needs to be upset at the end of the scene, he'd say, that's what we need to achieve, but get there however you want. And he'd leave the camera in the room, and everyone, all the crew, would have to leave the room, which is very rare. So we'd be left, and sometimes we could be doing a 7-page scene, which would take 18 minutes like to film or something like that, if we longed it out a lot. And so you really do find yourself lost in your character with these other people who are lost in their characters. And then, like I said, naturally you just find these beats that anyone could relate to in their own family. And like you say, and like I mentioned about me nagging to my parents and stuff like that. So it's kudos to the director really for really making us bond with each other and finding these beautiful little niches with each other.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard of anyone doing a second take in that way.
Yeah,
and in terms of your preparation process, because I know that's a huge part of your overall process and the way that you're putting together a character, especially when you knew that you were going to have this rehearsal week and this really great opportunity for discovery, did that kind of change or adjust how much you wanted to develop on your own, working on your own with the scripts beforehand?
Well, Blackbird was my first job that I went in every day and that I played a big part in, like a lead role. And before that, I hadn't had, now I've got a process that I have that I apply to every job I do. And at the time I didn't really. So I had this script, I had the breakdown of my character, and I knew how I wanted him to fit into this family. So I did a bit of my own work, and I came up with past experiences Jonathan might have, that's my character's name, and worked through in my head before I met everyone how his relationship works with all of the other people, bearing in mind of what I've got from the script. And then when we got together, I kind of learned all kinds of new processes. I took a bit maybe off Kate Winslet, a bit off Susan Sarandon, watching how everyone does their own thing. And what I learned was when you actually get in the room with other actors, they bring things that you never really imagined of their role. And if I never quite imagined Kate Winslet's character would be quite as uptight as it was, but it worked perfectly. And then you find out things about your character off the way you react from it. So I think the real prep for me started when we all got in that room together and we all showed each other what we were going to bring to the table for our own character, which then just added layers upon layers to each other's characters. So it was I've never had a rehearsal process like it again, to be honest with you, because it was such an ensemble and such a group effort and so natural. The way it was cast, I think, was perfect because we were really like a family. it did feel like a family when we were working. And so then we found out all these bits about our own characters. And by the time we came to filming, you know, I'd only had that 1 week of rehearsals, but I had a completely different understanding of what my character was from before I started the rehearsals.
Yeah, and in terms of the central core of Susan Sarandon's character, you know, she's kind of the central core of this family and suffering from ALS and choosing to end her life. Did you feel a need to kind of do any research into what that would be for her character to understand your character's relationship and what his emotional response to all of this would be?
Not particularly, because the characters in the film make a conscious effort to block my character Jonathan out from the intricacies of what's going on with his grandma. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing was, during our rehearsal week, we had a nurse of terminally ill patients come in to talk to us about when she deals with the families and stuff. And she said something which stuck with me the whole time while we were filming, which was, families often make a conscious effort to block out the youngest member, or, you know, the kids. They don't think they can handle it, they can't process it, they're going to react really badly from it. But almost always they're the ones that react the most rationally and with the best approach and with the most calm. And I thought that was really interesting, because often, you know, you think that you can't trust kids, or, oh, the kids can't take it, which is something that, a message that's carried through Blackbird a lot. Oh, Jonathan can't take it, Jonathan can't handle it. But what you actually see is Jonathan treating his grandma with the most respect and asking her how she feels and trying to make the most of the time with her that he has left. So it wasn't too important for me to find out the exact details of what was going on with her. And Jonathan, there's a scene in the film where the audience learns about exactly what's going on with Susan's character, which is through the eyes of Jonathan, because Jonathan's grandpa tells him what's going on with his grandma. So in order to make that as natural as possible and to sort of get the real reaction of the horrors of whatever's going on with grandma, I wanted to sort of have no knowledge of it and go into it like that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And was learning that piece of information about how families typically deal with it and how the youngest then approach it, was that a key component to the scenes with your grandfather, you know, with Jonathan's grandfather? Because I thought those scenes were so interesting, the way that he is just asking him very matter-of-fact questions. What's going to happen? When is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? And it's kind of almost the most removed with the emotion from it at that point.
Yeah, because it's like he's really got this point to prove to his mum and dad that they're wrong, and that is that a cat?
Yeah.
I love it, it's so cute. Anyway, he's got this point to prove that they're so set that he can't know what's going on, that he can't handle it, he's not old enough, whatever. And Jonathan's in such a state of rebellion with his parents, because they're trying to tell him what he wants to do for a career, they're trying to tell him where he needs to study, they're trying to tell him he's not mature enough to know what's going on with grandma. And so he makes this real effort to, like you say, be matter of fact about it and not let his emotions come into it, because he knows at the end of the day it's not about him, it's about his grandma. She's the one that summoned them to this house for a goodbye weekend because she wants to perform euthanasia. So there's two motives behind that, and one is to rebel against his parents, prove to them that he can handle it, and the second is because he is actually a really kind, sweet, caring kid who does want to give the grandma the goodbye that she wants.
Yeah, and kind of on the flip side, in terms of an emotional relationship, an emotional moment, one of the moments that I really loved was when he's talking to his grandmother and he says out loud, "I want to be an actor." And you can tell that he's never said those words out loud before. I was just interested in how you kind of mapped out and made the decision about the delivery of that, because it's such a poignant moment for your character in the film.
Well, it's exactly that. I remember Roger saying to me, he's never said this out loud before, because it's not, and very similar to me, actually, in my personal life as Anson. I've always wanted to be an actor, but until it really started to happen and I was doing stuff like Blackbird, it never really seemed like an actual viable option of something that I would do for the rest of my life, because I didn't grow up in London, I didn't grow up in circles of the entertainment industry, my parents aren't actors. So it was something that no one I know has ever done before, and that's something that Jonathan can relate to, because although Jonathan grew up near the city or whatever, his parents aren't actors, they're lawyers, so it's not something, and they're not creative at all. They wouldn't want him to do something like that, and they're pressuring him so much that he has all this sort of built up feelings. And like I say, he wants to rebel, but that is one step too far. Like say, they want him to go to college, they want him to be a lawyer, but he knows he wants to be an actor. And so I think he kind of just thinks, what the heck, grandma's dying, I'm just going to tell her, I'm going to say it for the first time. And Roger said, I want you to bear that all in mind, and then just say it, just let it out. And so I kind of, when I was delivering it, felt this build up inside of all these feelings about rebelling towards my parents, finding my true self, what I really want to do. And then you just find yourself saying it. It's like the biggest breath of fresh air ever. So, but I'm glad you noticed that anyway.
Yeah, and then I also was really interested in the use of space in the film because, you know, it is just the 8 of you and it is in this one location the whole time. And obviously there's different rooms, but I was interested in the way that, you know, Roger worked with you collaboratively on how you were really going to use that space and make it feel very fluid and like the characters were moving through it, even though, you know, it's very intimate and kind of still almost at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so much to do with, I mean, I think about the way we move through the space, and you think about Kate Winslet's character, and like I said about how uptight she is, or she's so set in her ways, and you see her like stamping on the ground, like walking through like that. And then my character, who, like I say, is just trying to chill everyone out, and I'm pushed to one side, quite literally always pushed to the side of the rooms, you know, the space that we're in the house, because Jonathan can't handle it. And I get this new perspective looking in on all the others, and Susan's character is often at the center of it all. And she just has like this spiral of people surrounding her in the space. And it is chaotic and crazy. And then I have this new perspective looking in because they push me to one side. And it's just, and I get to see all these people moving in the space differently. So yeah, it's interesting. And like you say, it's just in the house. That's the only location that we worked in. So it's kind of like, I remember walking into the set in the morning after, you know, I'd been at home for the night, and then I go in the morning, and it feels so chaotic, and like the air is so dense and stuff in there. So you do move through the space really differently. And I mean, when we first started shooting, and we were lucky enough to shoot in chronological scene order, which is really rare. So we genuinely went through the journey of our characters in real life as well. We got there at the start of the shoot, and there was that sort of lack of familiarity that you reach by the end of it once you've gone through this really sort of chaotic and extraordinary journey. And we're all, as actors, we'd all become best mates, but we're all really saying goodbye to each other at this point. And then we're saying goodbye to Lily, Susan's character in the film. And the way you move through the space is completely different. So you find us, I mean, at the start, there's this awkward gap in between everyone, and no one wants to stand near each other. And by the end, everyone's embracing. And certainly, I mean, there's a beat at the start with my character and Rainn Wilson's character, my dad, where I will not let him be anywhere near me. I'm like moving out the way and stuff. And then by the end, we're very happy to sit right next to each other. So the space is sort of reduced between us all as we become closer throughout the film.
Yeah, and also in terms of the amount of time that the movie takes place in, because it really is just over 2 days. It's not a very long amount of time. Kind of how did that impact the way that you were creating and crafting your character development throughout it? You know, it's like kind of as it goes on, his relationship with his parents even changes. You know, there's that great scene with the whole family around the table where everyone starts smoking pot, and he's very comfortable at that point being like, no, I know exactly what to do. I know how to do this, and I've clearly done this before, you know, in front of his uptight mum, which was an interesting shift and change. But it's obviously something that you had even been building up to at that point with everything that they've been going through. So how did you kind of map that out and craft that, knowing that you had to kind of make this character arc happen, but within a really short space of time in the real world?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's almost a map with my character in the script, a very specific map of scenes which unlock a certain new part in him that his parents had always suppressed, that his grandparents are now bringing out of him, because you find that his grandparents are these really liberal people, all very loving and you know, want to let everyone be who they are and let everyone say what they want, especially with Susan's character. She's coming towards the end of her life. She's fed up with all the restraints that people put on each other. And then you get his parents, who are the complete polar opposite. So, you know, there's a scene where Jonathan's grandpa, played by Sam Neill, sort of tells him about what's going on with his grandma. That unlocks, you know, sort of a new freedom in him. Okay, now I know. Then there's a scene, like we touched upon, where Jonathan tells his grandma, played by Susan, what he wants his future career to be as an actor. There, Jonathan's unlocked a bit more of his truth. He can now speak about that. Then they get around the table, and the dinner table, and Susan's character encourages my character to tell my parents. And I think, you know, if this is her last wish, maybe she's dying, I'm just going to do it. At that point, he's personifying this dream in front of his mum and dad. And that is just a massive unlocking moment. So he kind of, although it's in such a short space of time, because they're under really sort of extraordinary circumstances and everything is moving so quickly, and he's meeting like different people, like his grandma and his grandpa. He hasn't seen him in a long time. They're unlocking these new things in him. It just manages, it takes him through this arc in this short space of time. And like you say, by the end of it, all of our relationships are completely different because we've been plunged in this really difficult scenario together and just brought out all the best sides in each other by the end.
Yeah, and kind of, you know, jumping over to one of the other projects that you had last year with 1917, you know, I was interested in kind of how this film was very different in terms of what you would have to think about before you walked onto set and before you were shooting a scene, because something like 1917 had so much specificity to the detail and what needed to happen with the camera. And I imagine like a very strong choreography. So it's interesting kind of like how you had to prep individually for a scene on that film, and then how that was just a completely different dynamic coming into projects like Blackbird.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was completely different because on Blackbird, we often, like I said, Roger would have our director of photography, Mike Ely, leave the camera on a stand in the room, and it would just be looking at us, and he'd just allow us to play out the scene like that, and then they'd move the camera around the room. Obviously, we had some handheld stuff, but a lot of it was like that, and we were just left to our own devices to create this very natural family drama, whereas with 1917, the huge technical aspect of it all being to look as though it's one shot, one take, everything was, what's the word? Choreography. It was like choreography. So on one hand, Blackbird felt like we were doing a play because it was so playful and so stress-free. It was like every take we were allowed to be so different, and we did the improvisation thing. So like when you do a play, you're allowed to make it a bit different every night. That's kind of what we had on Blackbird. On 1917, it was the opposite. However, because we did so much rehearsal to make sure that we had it exactly staged out with the camera, we had to look this way, this point, this way at that point. We did so much rehearsal, that made it feel like a play as well. So it was extremely different. And you do, like I say, with Blackbird, there was so much more freedom when you went on set that you didn't have to have all the answers straight away. On 1917, although you had to have a lot of the answers so that you could hit all the beats you needed to, I was lucky enough that I was in the scene with lots of other people. So we managed to make it that little bit different every time. And as long as I had physically, I knew exactly the roadmap of what I needed to do in my head, I still had that sort of freedom to try things out differently. And Sam Mendes is just such a genius. Even in the most difficult of filming circumstances, he manages to make it feel like you can do whatever you want. God knows how he does it, but he's just incredible.
Yeah, and kind of diving a little bit further into that concept of a play and that rehearsal process, you did your first national theatre piece with Master Harold and the Boys, and that was the first time that you were stepping into a role in theatre. And obviously there's such an opportunity for rehearsal and discovery, and it's a really collaborative process to discovering. So did that kind of really evolve your process and the way that you think about characters when you're starting to put them together differently from working on that?
Yeah, and it was a very different experience to anything I'd had before, because on film, you're on your own so much when you're doing rehearsals. So you come up with your own process. And like I said, I'd done Blackbird and taken all the bits that I wanted from the individual actors and their rehearsal process. And so I'd kind of come up with my own process. And then when you get into the theatre, you're doing all of it with the director, the movement coach, the dialect coach, all of the other actors all the time. And it, like 1917, you're building where you have to physically hit each beat, obviously for the lights and the microphones and all stuff like that. But also you're sharing your entire rehearsal process with everyone in the room. So it's a completely different concept. But it's so good that I've managed to have this very unique variety of things from such an early stage, because it means that I'm taking all the best bits from all of them and putting that into my unique own rehearsal process. So I definitely learned, for example, when I was doing the play at the National Theatre, I learned about more things that you might learn at drama school, like actioning and stuff like that. So in my character's intention for each specific sentence. Whereas before, when I'd done film, I was more thinking about where I need to reach at the end of the scene and just letting it free flow from there. It didn't quite work like that when I did Master Howard and the Boys. I mean, there was only 3 of us, and none of us ever left the stage once, and there was no interval. So we had to, there was a roadmap and nothing could go wrong. But yeah, I've kind of picked out all the best bits of what I've done and tried to create my own process. And I'm learning so much as I go along. It's the best drama school I've ever been to, doing all these weird little bits that I'm doing, different jobs all the time.
Like you're the first person to get paid to go to drama school.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, because it was just such an intimate cast in that play as well, where you were just mentioning it was just the three of you and you're on stage the entire time. You know, when you're making a film, you kind of know, okay, this is the day that's going to be more intense. And then once I get through that, we're on the other side of this, and you can kind of anticipate it. But with that play, you really had to create that energy and that intensity and sustain it for every single performance. And, you know, sometimes more than once a day. And even though the National's more of a repertoire, so there are kind of gaps between performances, how did you kind of set about approaching it and thinking about the energy that you needed and how you were going to work to really sustain that and capture that in every single performance?
Well, I definitely didn't anticipate that it would be quite as hard as it was. I'll be honest. Theatre actors don't get the credit that they deserve. It is hard. But luckily for me, I try and keep really fit anyway. So, I mean, the actual physical demand of it is really great as well. And I don't think it's not easy to recognise that until you do it. And then you feel like you've run a marathon after you've done it. And sometimes you're doing 2 of them a day. And we didn't get an interval, so it was constant. And because you're constantly on stage, there's no chance to just have a breath or a glass of water or something like that. So, yeah, I definitely wasn't prepared for it. But, I mean, it was kind of like going to the army and gaining a whole new discipline of, you know, this is how you've got to do it. And you can't slip up, you can't relax because you've got 1,000 people watching you every night. So I can't remember it. I think it was like 4,000 actually. I can't remember how many people it was anyway in the Littleton Theatre, but it was a lot of people. And yeah, and the discipline I learned from that, and we're going on to a set after doing that and going with this whole new approach of like, okay, well, I've got to hit it every time. I'm not going to do one take where I'm going to slap because I've got to hit it every time for the audience. It's this whole new thing that I learned when I did the play. That was really cool.
That's so fantastic. And I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today about all of this. It's been really wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. A pleasure to meet you. Cheers.